Marriages, especially between noble families, were mainly alliance pacts, made for political reasons. At the expense were the women, often mere expendable pawns. This was the case for Agnese Visconti, who arrived in Mantua as the wife of Francesco I Gonzaga. Stubborn, haughty, self-confident, the young bride immediately made the first of her many mistakes, remaining a Visconti in the house of the Gonzagas. Distant from the mentality of her new family, she is incapable of adapting to local customs. Moreover, time passes and she does not become pregnant, the suspicion of not being able to have children. Unfortunately, as the months go by, the situation becomes more and more burdensome. Instead of taking a step back, the proud Visconti continues to openly defy her spouse. Her husband wants to get rid of her and sets a lethal trap. With the excuse of wanting to improve his personal safety, Gonzaga replaces his wife's 2 bodyguards with the knight Antonio da Scandiano. The hook is cast and the fish bite. Unsurprisingly, Agnese and Antonio, young, alone and united by the same intentions, end up falling in love. Agnese is destined to succumb, as a bride without an heir. For his part, Francesco is now determined to get rid of her as soon as circumstances permit. In fact, shortly afterwards he accuses his wife of adultery. The witnesses called to testify deny ever having caught the 2 accused in indecent behavior. But the next day, probably bent over by torture, they change their version. Behind the accusation of infidelity there were only motives of interest. Francesco in fact remarried only 2 years later to Margherita Malatesta, allying himself with the lords of Rimini against the Visconti. Francesco decreed the hanging for Antonio, and for his young bride the sentence was death by decapitation. He will finally have her head cut off, which in 10 years of marriage he has been unable to bring down. On a cold February night in 1391, in absolute secrecy the 2 are executed. Great absentee is the cowardly Francesco Gonzaga. Agnese dies at only 28 years old. Like and follow me, and if you know an interesting story, write it in the comments, I will make a video story about it.